All my life, I taught my daughter that family is everything. I gave all my savings to pay for her wedding, but on the day she denied me a place in the family photo, I realized I had one final card to play that no one knew about. My name is Dorothy May, and at 63, I believed I had a firm grasp on the rhythm of life. My days, once a frantic blur of nursing shifts and raising two headstrong children, had settled into a comfortable routine. My retirement had brought with it a peaceful existence, filled with gardening, volunteering at the local animal shelter, and the occasional boisterous lunch with my best friend, Susan. It was a simple, yet profoundly rewarding life. I had always tried to instill in my children, particularly my daughter, Jessica, the importance of kindness, of seeing the good in people, and of understanding that true value lies not in appearances, but in character. How naive I was to think those lessons had taken root. Jessica's wedding was supposed to be the crowning achievement of a lifetime of maternal sacrifice. I had, in a fit of boundless generosity and maternal pride, offered to pay for the entire affair, every last cent. From the sprawling country club venue, to the designer dress that cost more than my first car, to the live band that was so exclusive they had their own rider with specific imported water. It was an exorbitant sum, one that had nearly depleted my retirement savings. But I saw it as a final, grand gift to my daughter, a way of saying, I love you, and I want you to have the fairy tale you deserve. I had even decided to wear my old navy blue dress from a few years ago. It was comfortable, elegant, and I figured, why waste money on a new dress when the one I had was perfectly fine? Little did I know, that would be my first mistake in a long list of them. The day of the wedding was a whirlwind of frantic energy. I was everywhere at once, a human stress ball with a purpose. I helped the florists arrange the centerpieces, calmed the jittery groomsmen, and even managed to find a misplaced ring bearer's pillow. I was the silent, benevolent architect of a day that was supposed to be perfect. My heart swelled with pride as I watched Jessica, a vision in white lace, glide down the aisle. She looked like an angel. An angel who, I was about to discover, had a razor-sharp tongue and a heart as cold as a January morning. The photographer, a lanky young man with a man bun and an artistic smirk, was calling out instructions for the family photos. Okay, everyone, let's get the family shot with the bride and groom. Parents, grandparents, everyone in close, he chirped. I stepped forward, beaming, ready to stand beside my beautiful girl. That's when it happened. Jessica's eyes, which had been sparkling moments ago, narrowed as she looked me up and down. Her face was a mask of cold displeasure. She leaned in. Her voice was a low hiss that was meant only for my ears. Mom, you can't be in the main photo. You're just too big. You'll throw off the entire composition. It's my day, and I need it to be perfect. You can stand to the side with Aunt Carol and Uncle Bob. We'll get a quick shot of you later. The world seemed to stop. The music, the chatter, the joy, it all faded into a deafening silence. My own daughter, the girl I had nursed through sleepless nights, the one I had cheered for at every soccer game, the one whose college tuition I had scraped together every cent for, had just called me too fat for her wedding photo. For a split second, I felt the familiar burn of humiliation, a hot flash of shame that threatened to bring me to my knees. But then a new feeling rose up in me, a fiery, simmering rage that was both shocking and liberating. It was the feeling of a lifetime of putting others first, of sacrificing my own needs for the sake of those I loved, and now, finally, realizing that it was all for nothing, all for a moment of such cold, calculated cruelty. I took a deep breath, and a small, almost imperceptible smile played on my lips. It was a smile that didn't reach my eyes, a smile of a woman who had just realized she held all the power. Okay, darling, I said, my voice as calm and collected as if she had just asked me to pass the salt. Whatever you say. I turned and walked toward the table where the wedding gifts were being stored. I had something to do. You see, A good friend of mine told me I should start a channel to share my stories with others. So if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to my channel. The rest of this story will blow your mind, and you won't want to miss a single moment of it. The betrayal was a public spectacle, but the revenge would be a quiet, devastating act. What happened next not only changed the wedding, but revealed a depth of deceit you won't believe. I walked away from Jessica, leaving her to pose with her newly acquired in-laws. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Humiliation, anger, and a bitterness so profound it felt like a physical weight in my stomach. Too big. The words echoed in my head, a vicious little mantra. I had always been a woman of substance, a nurse who had been on her feet for 12-hour shifts, a mother who had carried her children until they were too big to hold. My body was a testament to a life lived, not a canvas for her perfection. And yet, she had reduced me to a flaw in her carefully constructed image. The irony was so thick I could almost choke on it. The perfect day, the perfect dress, the perfect photos, all paid for by the woman who was too big to be in them. My steps were steady as I made my way to the table laden with gifts. The white linen tablecloth, the carefully wrapped boxes. It all looked so pristine and innocent. It was all a lie. I saw a small box with a card from me, a lovely serving platter I had painstakingly picked out, a small token of love from a mother to her daughter, a symbol of a bond I now realized was utterly one-sided. I pushed it aside, my hands shaking slightly. I was no longer interested in giving. My new purpose was to take back what was mine, my dignity. I saw Mark, my son, and his wife Sarah, laughing with their friends. They were a part of this perfect world too, and my rage extended to them. Where was my son? Why wasn't he standing up for me? He was a spineless boy, a man who had no sense of honor or loyalty. It was a bitter pill to swallow. I had raised them both to be better than this, but I had failed. I had raised two people who saw me as nothing more than a bank account and an afterthought. I found the small leather-bound folder I had left there earlier. Inside was a copy of the check, the very large, very significant check. It was for the entire wedding, every last detail. The catering, the venue, the dress, the flowers. I had spent nearly my entire retirement savings to give her this day, and this was my reward. Too big. My lips twisted into a wry smile. If I was too big to be in the photo, then maybe the check was too big to ignore. I walked back towards the photographer. The family was still posing, a tableau of forced smiles and expensive clothing. "Excuse me, young man," I said, my voice cutting through the air like a knife. The photographer looked at me, a flicker of irritation in his eyes. "Can I help you, ma'am?" I pulled the check out of the folder and handed it to him. "Just a little something for you to consider," I said, a glint in my eye. He took the check, his eyes widening as he saw the number. His jaw dropped. "Ma'am, this is for the entire wedding." "I know, and I have a little announcement to make, something that I think will be important for the photos." Jessica, who had been posing with her arm around her new husband, turned and looked at me, her expression a mixture of confusion and annoyance. "Mom, what are you doing?" she hissed. I didn't answer her. I just looked at the photographer, who was still staring at the check in his hand. "Would you be so kind as to make an announcement to the entire gathering?" I asked him, my voice dripping with honeyed sweetness. He looked from me to the check and back again, a calculating look in his eyes. He nodded slowly. He stepped forward, cleared his throat, and tapped the microphone. The music stopped. All eyes turned to him. I was about to get my moment. "This is the culmination of everything. The moment you have been waiting for is right here. Stay with me to see how I finally put everyone in their place. This story will not end the way you think it will, and every second is worth the wait. The photographer, a young man named Liam, held the check as if it were a fragile artifact from a bygone era. His eyes, wide with a mixture of shock and professional curiosity, darted between me and my daughter, Jessica. The sudden silence that had fallen over the crowd was so thick you could cut it with a butter knife. All eyes were on me, the fat old lady who was supposed to be in the back of the photo, standing next to her irrelevant relatives. This was my moment, the moment I had dreamed of since I decided to give them this wedding. It was not a moment of glory, but of reckoning, a moment of glorious, bitter revenge. "Liam," I said, my voice as sweet as honey, but with the subtle undertone of a snake charmer's flute, "I believe you have a little announcement to make to the lovely couple and all their guests." Liam, clearly out of his element, swallowed hard. "Ma'am, I don't think—" "Oh, but you do." I cut him off, a wry smile on my face. "You see, everyone here is celebrating love, family, and new beginnings. What a beautiful thing!" I gestured to the sprawling country club, the expensive flowers, the live band. I just wanted to make sure everyone was aware of the little gift I gave to my daughter and her new husband, a gift that, I believe, you now hold in your hand. A murmur went through the crowd. Jessica, now looking less like an angel and more like a harpy, marched toward me. "Mom, what is this? What are you doing?" she hissed, her face a mask of furious confusion. "Don't you dare ruin my day." "Ruin your day, my dear?" I chuckled, a low, guttural sound that was filled with both pain and triumph. "Oh, darling, your day was ruined the moment you looked at your mother, the woman who gave up everything for you and called her too big. That was the moment." I looked at her, and for the first time in a very long time, I saw her not as my daughter, but as a stranger who had a lot to learn about decency and respect. Liam, sensing a story unfolding that was far more dramatic than any staged wedding photo, cleared his throat and tapped the microphone again. The amplified sound made everyone jump. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "I have just been informed that the entire wedding, including the venue, the catering, the dress, and the band, has been paid for by the mother of the bride, Dorothy May." The murmur in the crowd grew louder. Faces turned to me, their expressions a mix of surprise, pity, and shock. Jessica's face was now a deep crimson. Her new husband, a handsome but clearly clueless young man named David, looked from me to his wife, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Mom, you didn't—" Jessica stammered, her voice a whisper of disbelief. "Oh, but I did, darling. Every last cent." I held up the check for everyone to see. The numbers were large and impossible to ignore. "I did it for you, my love, because I wanted you to have the perfect day, the perfect wedding, the perfect photos." I paused for a moment, letting the words sink in. "But it seems I wasn't perfect enough for the photos myself. What a shame." The silence that followed was deafening. The only sound was the faint rustle of leaves in the trees. It was the moment I had taken control of my own narrative. My son, Mark, who was standing with Sarah, looked at me with a mixture of anger and panic. They knew. They all knew. And now, so did everyone else. The truth was out, but the real show was about to begin. The family's reaction to my reveal was just the beginning of a storm you won't want to miss. Will they beg for forgiveness, or will their cruelty escalate? The aftermath of my little announcement was an exquisite ballet of human emotion. Jessica's face, a canvas of righteous fury just moments before, now dissolved into a petulant scowl. She looked less like a bride and more like a child whose favorite toy had just been snatched away. Her new husband, David, a man who seemed to specialize in bewildered expressions, looked at me as if I had just sprouted a second head. The crowd was a silent, judgmental jury, their eyes darting between me and the happy couple. "Mom," Jessica began, her voice low and dangerous. "How could you do this to me on my wedding day?" I met her glare with a serene smile. "Do what, dear? Share the joy?" "I thought that's what we were all here for." My sarcasm was so sharp it could have cut through the wedding cake. "This isn't about sharing. This is about humiliating me," she spat, her perfect white dress rustling with her rage. "Honey, the only person humiliating you is yourself. I'm just providing the context." David, bless his naive little heart, tried to intercede. "Dorothy May, I'm sure there's a misunderstanding here." I turned to him, my gaze unwavering. "Misunderstanding, you man? A misunderstanding is when I ask for chicken and they bring me fish. A misunderstanding is not when a daughter tells her mother she's too big to be in a family photo on a day her mother paid for. That, my dear boy, is a fact." The word fact hung in the air, a heavy, unassailable truth. David wilted under my stare, his face a pale imitation of his wife's fury. My son, Mark, finally broke his silence. He strode toward me, his face a thundercloud. "Mom, you need to stop this. You're being irrational." "Irrational?" I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "Mark, the day you learned to spell irrational was the day you became a bigger disappointment than your sister." His face hardened. He was a man of words, but not of action. His wife, Sarah, just stared at me, her eyes filled with a cold, calculating look I knew all too well. She was the architect of so much of this, the one who whispered poison into their ears. I turned my back on them, a grand theatrical gesture. "Well, I believe I have had my fill of this celebration. The cake is here, the band is playing, and the bride is, well, she's here too. My work here is done. Enjoy your perfect day, darling. Every last perfect cent of it." I started to walk away, but Jessica grabbed my arm. "You can't leave. You can't just leave. What will everyone think?" I looked at her hand on my arm, then at her face. The look in my eyes must have been pure ice, because she dropped her hand as if she had been burned. "Honey," I said softly, my voice filled with a chilling finality, "everyone will think what they want, and you will have to live with it. As for me, I have a life to live, a life that from this day forward will no longer be about living up to your impossible standards." I walked away from the wedding, from my children, and from the life I thought I had. The sound of the crowd's whispers and the faint strains of the band faded into the background. I got in my car and drove away, a free woman. But the story wasn't over, not by a long shot. They had a wedding, but I had something else, something they would never see coming. This was only the beginning of my retribution. The truth had been revealed, but their cruelty would escalate beyond anything I could have imagined. And I had a few surprises of my own up my sleeve. Will they ever see me again? Or will I disappear, leaving them to live with the consequences of their actions? The days following the wedding were a strange, hollow blur. The silence was deafening. My phone, which had once buzzed with frantic calls from Jessica about flower arrangements and seating charts, was now eerily quiet. I found a certain morbid humor in it. It seemed my family had finally gotten what they wanted, a world without me, or at least a world without my purse strings attached. I spent my mornings with Susan, my dear friend who had been my rock through this entire ordeal. She didn't offer platitudes or empty words of comfort. She just listened, her face a perfect mixture of righteous indignation and quiet empathy. "You know, Dorothy May," she said one morning as we sat on her porch swing sipping iced tea, "they're probably fuming. They can't figure out why you're not begging for their forgiveness. They can't stand the thought of you being happy without them." I smiled, a genuine smile this time. Let them fume. I'm living my best life. I'm retired, I have a beautiful garden, and I have a best friend who understands that sometimes the best revenge is just moving on. But even as I said the words, I knew it wasn't the whole truth. My heart still ached. The betrayal was a fresh wound, and I knew that a simple smile wasn't going to heal it. I needed more. I needed a plan. The next day, I started to execute it. My first move was to contact my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Brenda. I had worked with her on my will for years, making sure everything was in order for my children. Now, I was making sure everything was in order for me. I told her the entire story, from the moment Jessica called me too big to the grand reveal with the check. Brenda just listened, her face impassive. When I finished, she just nodded. "So you want to change your will?" "Brenda, I don't want to change it. I want to shred it, every single word. And then I want to write a new one, a completely new one that will make them regret ever crossing me." Brenda's eyes lit up. "Now that's what I like to hear," she said, a wicked grin spreading across her face. We worked for hours, meticulously going over every detail. We went over my assets, my properties, and my savings. I made sure that every last thing was accounted for and that my children would not get a single cent of it. I left everything to the animal shelter I volunteered at, to a local charity that helped underprivileged kids, and to Susan. Yes, I left a small fortune to my best friend, who had been there for me through thick and thin. The look on Brenda's face was priceless. It was a look of pure, unadulterated respect. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about justice. This was about making a statement that said, you don't get to treat people like they're disposable and then expect them to hand you a golden ticket. I was feeling good. I was taking control. But then my peaceful, vengeful bubble was burst. I got a call from my son. I stared at the phone, a knot forming in my stomach. I knew this wasn't a call to apologize. This was a call for something else, something they wanted. "Hello?" I said, my voice cold and distant. "Mom, it's me. We need to talk." His voice was strained, and I could hear the desperation in it. "Marie, we have nothing to talk about. We talked at the wedding. Mom, please, this is important. It's about Dad's trust." The mention of my late husband, George, sent a jolt through me. George had been a kind, loving man who had left a small trust for our children, but he had made me the sole executor. I had always handled it with the utmost care and respect, ensuring that everything was in order. "What about it?" I asked, my voice still as cold as ice. We need access to it. We need the money." "Need the money? For what?" I asked, a sense of dread creeping up my spine. "The wedding. We have some unexpected bills. The venue, the catering, the band. It seems your check bounced." My heart sank. This wasn't just about money. This was about something much more sinister. This was about a lie they had been telling all along. My mind raced. A bounced check? Impossible. My bank account was solid, and I had personally verified the funds before even writing that check. They were lying. But why? "Mark," I said, my voice low and dangerous, "my check did not bounce. The money is in my account, and it was in my account on the day of the wedding. So what is going on?" He stammered, his usual arrogance replaced by a nervous, shaky tone. "Mom, I swear, the bank called us. They said the check was rejected. There must be some kind of mistake. We just need the money from Dad's trust to cover the costs until we get this sorted out." A sick feeling settled in my stomach. They weren't just after money, they were after control. I hung up the phone without another word. My hands were shaking, and I felt a familiar surge of anger. They thought I was a fool. They thought they could lie to me, manipulate me, and take what was not theirs. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I called Brenda, my lawyer, immediately. Brenda, I need you to do something for me. I need you to contact the bank where the wedding venue's account is held. I need you to find out what happened to my check. Brenda, in her usual no-nonsense manner, simply said, "On it, Dorothy May. Don't you worry about a thing." I didn't have to wait long. Brenda called me back a few hours later, her voice filled with a mixture of amusement and disgust. "Dorothy May, you are not going to believe this. I called the bank. The check did not bounce. It was deposited, and then, a few hours later, it was transferred to an account in the Cayman Islands." I felt a cold dread creep up my spine. The Cayman Islands? Why? Who transferred it? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "The venue," she said. "It seems they have a partnership with a company that handles special transactions." I'm afraid to ask what that means, but it seems your daughter and her new husband, along with her in-laws, were in on it. The pieces of the puzzle fell into place with a horrifying click. They had never intended to pay for the wedding themselves. They had used my money, the money I had sacrificed my retirement for, to funnel to a secret account. The wedding was nothing more than a front, a spectacle to distract from their true intentions. They were thieves. My own children were thieves. I felt a wave of nausea. I had been so proud of them, so sure they were good people. But they were nothing more than vultures, circling me, waiting for me to die so they could feast on my carcass. But they had made one fatal mistake. They had underestimated me. They assumed that a woman in her 60s was a helpless, feeble creature who would not fight back. They were wrong. So wrong. "Brenda," I said, my voice a steely whisper, "I have a new plan. I want you to file a lawsuit against the wedding venue, my daughter, my son, and their spouses. I want to sue them for fraud, theft, and emotional distress. I want to take everything they have." Brenda just laughed. It was a cold, hard laugh that was filled with pure joy. "Dorothy May, I have been waiting my entire career for a case like this. We are going to make them regret the day they were born." The truth was out. The family's deceit was not just a one-time betrayal, but a calculated long-term fraud. And now, the game was on. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about exposing them for the vile, greedy people they were. What will happen when they receive the lawsuit? Will they fight back? Or will they crumble under the pressure? The days turned into a blur of legal meetings and unsettling silence. I had not heard a word from my children since I had hung up on Mark, and the quiet was more nerve-wracking than their screaming. Brenda, my legal warrior, had filed the lawsuit as promised. The papers had been served, and I could only imagine the pandemonium that erupted when they were delivered. They had probably thought I was bluffing. They had probably laughed when they saw the first check from my lawyer. But this was no joke. This was a battle, and I was in it to win. I tried to keep busy. I spent hours in my garden, pulling weeds with a fierce determination, my mind replaying every conversation, every hurtful word. I was a woman on a mission to take back my dignity, my life, and my money. I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I wasn't just Dorothy May, the retired nurse who loved gardening. I was Dorothy May, the woman who was going to take on her own family in a court of law. It was a bizarre, surreal thought, but it was also the most empowering one I had ever had. My peaceful bubble was burst once again when I received a call from my son-in-law, David. His voice was not filled with his usual bewildered confusion. It was laced with a chilling, thinly veiled threat. "Dorothy May, we need to talk. This lawsuit, it's a mistake. You need to drop it now." "A mistake, David?" I scoffed, a dark, cynical humor bubbling up inside me. "The mistake was you and your wife thinking you could use me as your personal ATM. The mistake was thinking you could steal from me and get away with it." "Mom, think about what you're doing. he said, his voice dropping to a low, sinister whisper. "You're a woman of a certain age. The legal system is complicated. Things can get messy, and you wouldn't want to get hurt, would you?" The threat was unmistakable. He was not just asking me to drop the lawsuit, he was telling me, and he was doing it with a threat of violence. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I refused to back down. This was it, the final straw, the moment they revealed their true colors. I took a deep breath, and a cold, steely resolve filled me. "David, you listen to me very carefully," I said, my voice as calm as a summer breeze, but with the force of a hurricane behind it. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. You think you can scare me? You think a woman who spent 35 years in an ER dealing with every kind of human evil is afraid of you? You are a small, pathetic little man, and you just made the biggest mistake of your life. I'm not backing down. I'm coming for you, for all of you." I hung up the phone before he could respond. My hands were shaking, but it wasn't from fear. It was from pure, unadulterated rage. They had gone too far. They had threatened me. They had threatened my safety, and I was going to make them pay. I called Brenda and told her what had happened. She was furious. "Dorothy May, we're not just suing them for fraud anymore. We're getting a restraining order, and we're going for every last thing they have, the house, the cars, the jewelry, everything." It was a bold move, but it was the right one. They had to learn that their actions had consequences, that you can't just bully your way through life without repercussions. My children's cruelty was escalating, and I knew I had to be one step ahead. But what they did next was beyond anything I could have ever imagined. The real betrayal was still to come, and it was going to hit me where it hurt the most. I had a feeling this was going to get worse before it got better, and I was right. The restraining order was filed, and I felt a brief sense of relief. At least for a little while I was safe from their threats. But the relief was short-lived. A few days later, as I was walking out of a grocery store, a car pulled up beside me. It was my son, Mark, and his wife, Sarah. They had clearly ignored the restraining order, and the look on their faces was chilling. It was a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. "Mom," Mark said, his voice a low growl, "you need to drop this. Now. You're making a huge mistake." "The only mistake I made, Mark, was thinking I raised a decent human being," I shot back, my heart pounding in my chest. Sarah just sneered. "We know what you're doing. You're trying to get a piece of the inheritance. Well, you're not getting a cent. Not from us, not from anyone." I just stared at them, my mind reeling. They still didn't get it. This wasn't about money. This was about principle. This was about a mother who had been betrayed by her own children. "You think this is about money," I said, a dry, bitter laugh escaping my lips. "Oh, you pathetic, pathetic people. This is about dignity. This is about justice. This is about a woman who is tired of being walked all over." Their faces were a mask of fury. They drove off, leaving me standing there, shaking with a mix of fear and rage. They were getting desperate. They were losing control, and I knew that was the most dangerous thing of all. I called Brenda immediately and told her what had happened. She was furious. "Dorothy May, we're going to get the police involved. This is a clear violation of the restraining order. They are playing with fire, and they are going to get burned." I knew she was right. But a small part of me, the part that still loved them, still hoped that they would see the error of their ways, that they would apologize, that they would somehow, miraculously, turn into the people I thought I had raised. But that part of me was a fool, because the next thing that happened was beyond the pale. I got a call from the animal shelter. They were in a panic. The funds I had left them in my will had been stolen. The account was empty, and they had a very specific lead. A transaction had been made to a new offshore account, and it was tied to a familiar name, my son's. He had somehow gotten access to my lawyer's files. He had somehow found out about my will. He had somehow stolen the money that was meant for the animals. My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about pure, unadulterated evil. They had not only betrayed me, they had betrayed the animals, the innocent, helpless animals that I had loved and cared for. This was a new low, even for them. My eyes welled up with tears, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of pure rage. I knew what I had to do. I had to end this, once and for all. My rage was a living, breathing thing. It had a name, and that name was vengeance. They had not only betrayed me, they had attacked the innocent animals I loved, the helpless creatures who had nothing to do with their greed. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about right and wrong. I was going to make them regret the day they were born. I was going to destroy them, but not in a way they would ever see coming. I had a secret weapon. A secret so well guarded, so deeply buried, that not even my lawyer, Brenda, knew about it. My late husband, George, had been a brilliant, eccentric man. He was a master of his own destiny, and he had made a series of investments that were so convoluted and so well hidden that no one would ever be able to find them. He had created a series of shell companies, offshore accounts, and trusts that were completely untraceable. He had left me a single key, a single piece of paper that held the key to everything. He had told me, "Dorothy May, I have given you the power to protect yourself. Use it wisely." And I was going to use it. I was going to use it to bring them to their knees. I spent the next week in a haze of phone calls, meetings, and legal maneuvers. I called a series of lawyers, investigators, and financial experts who specialized in these types of things. I told them what I wanted, and they just listened, their faces a mixture of awe and disbelief. I wanted them to use George's assets to buy every single one of my children's debts. Every single last cent. I wanted them to buy their mortgages, their credit card debt, their car payments, every single one. And I wanted them to do it in my name. I wanted them to know that it was me. I wanted them to know that their mother, the woman they had called too big for a photograph, was the one who was going to bury them. The final confrontation was a masterpiece of my own making. I had Brenda set up a meeting with my children, their spouses, and their lawyers. It was to be a settlement meeting, a way to resolve the lawsuit. They thought they had me. They thought I was going to back down. They thought they were going to win. They had no idea what was coming. We all sat in a large conference room, a tableau of tension and hostility. My children looked smug, their lawyers looked confident, and I just sat there, a serene smile on my face. Dorothy May, their lawyer, a smug, arrogant man named Mr. Thompson, began, "We are here to resolve this matter. We have a very generous offer for you. If you drop the lawsuit and sign a non-disclosure agreement, we will give you a small stipend every month for the rest of your life. It's a fair offer." I just smiled. "A fair offer, Mr. Thompson. I think you and your clients have a very different definition of fair than I do." He just smirked, a look of condescending pity on his face. "Dorothy May, we have all the leverage here. You have nothing." That was my cue. I looked at Brenda and nodded. She opened a large briefcase and pulled out a series of folders. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice a low, steady rumble, "I believe you'll want to take a look at these." She slid the folders across the table. One by one, their smug faces drained of color. The first folder contained a document showing that I had purchased their mortgage. The second, their credit card debt. The third, their car payments. The fourth, a legal document showing that I had bought their student loans. It was all there. Every single debt. All in my name. The game was over, and I had won. My children's faces were a masterpiece of shock, fear, and utter defeat. The look in their eyes was priceless. It was the look of a person who had just realized they had messed with the wrong woman. But the story wasn't over, not by a long shot. The next part will reveal how I used my power to truly change their lives forever. Will they learn their lesson, or will their greed consume them? The truth is coming, and you will not want to miss a single second of it. The silence in the room was so thick, you could almost taste it. Their lawyers, who had been so confident just moments before, were now a pale imitation of their former selves. My children, my beautiful, cruel children, just stared at the folders on the table, their faces ashen. Jessica's perfect wedding day had been a lie. Their perfect lives had been a lie. And I was the one who had just exposed it all. "Mom," Mark said, his voice a shaky whisper. "What is this? What have you done?" "I've done what any mother would do, my dear," I said, a serene smile on my face. "I've saved you. I've saved you from yourselves." They just stared at me, their eyes wide with confusion. "I don't understand," Jessica said, her voice filled with a desperate plea for an explanation. "You bought our debts? Why?" "Because I wanted to," I said, my voice filled with a chilling finality. "Because I wanted to show you what it felt like to be completely powerless, to have your life in someone else's hands." Their lawyers, who had finally regained their composure, began to object, to scream, to threaten. But it was no use. The documents were all legal and binding. There was nothing they could do. I just sat there, a queen on her throne, watching as their perfect world crumbled around them. I had won. Not just the lawsuit, but the entire game. I had taken back my power, my dignity, and my life. I stood up, signaling to Brenda that our work was done. As I walked out of the room, I looked at them one last time. Jessica, her face stained with tears and humiliation. Mark, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Their spouses, their eyes filled with a mixture of fear and rage. They were broken. Their greed, their cruelty, their utter lack of decency had led them to this moment. They had nothing, and they had no one to blame but themselves. I walked out of the building, into the sunlight. The air felt cleaner. The world felt brighter. I had finally found my peace. I had a new will, a new life, and a new purpose. My name was Dorothy May, and I was a woman who had been through a fire and had come out stronger. My children's betrayal had not broken me, it had made me. And as I walked away, a small, genuine smile on my face, I knew that I had finally won. The final climax had unfolded, but the story was not over. My actions had set off a ripple effect that would change my children's lives forever. Will they learn their lesson and try to rebuild their lives, or will they be consumed by their greed? I knew that the answer would be revealed in time, but for now, I was content. My journey had come to an end, and I was a free woman.